Hello, welcome to News from the Real World. My name is Sasha Schwartz.
I'm Julian Goldman.
I'm Megan Jones.
I'm Sophie Chin.
And I'm Annie Sherman, and this podcast is brought to you by Cheerios.
Okay. Our first article is called Costumes and Makeup, Designing Temporary Body Modification from Howl Round by M.L. Hart. So this article was basically just a general overview about what the cool things that costume and makeup designers do. And while it wasn't really a big surprise for what, we are a part of, it's not like we don't appreciate these things. I think this article was meant more for people who didn't already know what costumers do. It was cool to get insight into kind of this idea of costume design as body modification, because a lot of times we don't think about it that way unless it's for, horror makeup and stuff like that. So that's what I thought was interesting about it.
One of the things I really took away from this article was she had a whole paragraph about the difference between costuming plays and musicals, especially way back when, because when you're doing a big period piece, you're going to have a lot of weight on the actor, and you're going to have a lot of layers. So the difference between that and a musical is you can't really tap dance in a bunch of layers. So it's a big consideration of what your actors will be doing, as well as just the kind of look you're going for. And something else that stood out to me was the fact that she talked about the difference between costuming then and now, and how people used to have hair that would be very good for styling when it was giant hairstyles from a period piece, but now people have all kinds of crazy hair or short hair, so wigs are coming back into style again, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting, in terms of that weight thing, she was talking about how as soon as the actor puts on whatever they're wearing, it's automatically going to change the way they act and the way they move, just because the way that clothes fit on you and the way that the weight of the clothes is distributed on you is going to change your physicality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminded me a lot of what Marla was talking about during Plague, about how all of her renderings were collages, and how all of the designs were also collages. So there was a corset and then an underdress and then a hoop skirt and then something on top, and that wasn't even. I mean, there was kind of a period for Plague, but obviously it was very fantastical, and so that idea of collaging and layers, besides just being a technicality, also can make the costume more interesting. But in Plague, they did have to dance and sing, and so that was also something I'm sure she thought about.
Also with Plague, she didn't know what they were going to have to do.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. So they needed to be ready for anything and everything.
Yeah. I think also that was something cool that they talked about was the idea that, I know just, how much a costume or makeup can change how the audience views someone. Just talking about Plague again, just because it's the most recent thing in my memory, is that one of the actors had a prosthetic nose on, which automatically aged them a lot more. And over me personally, I have a lot of trouble disconnecting actors from their characters. But because of those prosthetics, it really helped to distance me.
Yeah, I didn't recognize him at all.
I was like, who's playing him? But then it helps you get really, really into the character.
Yeah. I mean, for someone who doesn't have a big costume background and, not really familiar with it at all, it was just very interesting to, hear from their point of view and, see all exactly what they do, because in some ways I feel like I am very much an outsider to costuming because I don't know much about it, and it's something that I don't put much thought into, and I definitely, from being at school this year, have thought a lot more about it now when I see someone on stage, in the clothes there are, and I'm like, someone put so much time in every little detail in that, and, you can actually kind of see what they're trying to accomplish with it.
Yeah, and I liked the idea what she said about the rule of thirds for her costume design, just 1/3 color, 1/3 texture, and 1/3 shape/mass. Which is, I don't know if that's applicable to everything, because maybe some characters are just about color, or maybe what makes it interesting is that it's huge and not necessarily colorful, but I guess, that's, a good basis for, the standard for what a costume should have.
I don't know what she meant by 1/3, though. How can something be 1/3 texture? The whole costume's going to have texture.
I guess, and how much consideration?
I think it's a lot about balancing. If you have something that's very, very colorful, you need to kind of, balance it out by, maybe instead of overbearing it with color, you have it, differentiate, with texture, too.
And she said she used it to create, symmetry, proportion, and harmony. So it's, harmony between a lot of color versus not that much texture, or, that balance that she was talking about. Or sometimes it's just, a lot happening at once, and that's what makes it interesting.
I remember what Susan said to us about, in our design class, about you need a place for the eye to feast and the eye to rest. So I think that's sort of a big part of that, too. So if you do have that overloading of color, maybe you should take back on texture, or take back on shape. So that way the audience isn't completely overwhelmed, but also you should still make them very interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Can we move on to our next one?
Yes. So our next article is called Nudity on Stage, Why It Always Changes the Dynamic. It was published in the Chicago Tribune by Nora Metz.
Nina Metz.
Oh, Nina Metz. Sorry.
Sorry,
I read that wrong.
Nina.
Sorry, Nina. So I basically, what I took away from this article the most was that it was about the idea of, they're talking about a play festival and how bringing the idea of nudity into there really does change how everybody views the process and how the audience views it. It talks a lot about the shock value of nudity and sort of like what changes in the process when nudity is introduced.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I do think that sometimes, like, I understand the value of having nudity in a production, but I do think you have to consider almost, is it worth it? Not worth it in terms of ethics, because I see no problem with it, but I think in terms of shock value, again, because if you have your audience completely, like, astounded by, oh my gosh, there's a nude actress on stage, it takes you out of the story completely. Yeah. Like, in the article they talked about, where do I look? Do I look at their face? Do I look at their form? It's just very hard for sometimes the audience to keep their focus.
And then the impact you're trying to make might just be taken away from, like, oh my god, a naked person. And, like, it sucks that that's, like, our point of view as people, like, in our society today, but, like, it is, and, like, you need to consider how it's going to be, like, reacted to. Even if that's not, like, what you want, what you're trying to do, like, that's what will happen. You'll get a big reaction.
Yeah. I think it's, like, especially because they talk about how it's, like, 10-minute plays in this, that this festival was for. So, like, you think, like, in a whole scope of the show, like, I mean, you can see, because a lot of nudity comes at, like, the end of shows, and, like, you see this arc, like, characters go on to get, whether it's, like, a striptease or, like, a sex scene, something like that. But, like, in a 10-minute play, I can only imagine what kind of, like, storyline they have to come up with to, like, make it so it's not, like, just a spectacle that it's, like, they're nude on stage, that it's, like, accepted within the story.
And I do think there is a bit, I remember when this article was first posted on the blog, me and one of the girls in our class had this discussion that there is a big gender difference when it comes to nudity on stage. Sure. The best example I can think of is actually here at Carnegie Mellon this year. We have a lot of shows where, not completely nude, but women will be on stage just in a bra or, like, in a tank top, and, like, they always change on stage. That's always, like, a moment. But
it's their vulnerability.
Yeah, it shows that they're vulnerable. While in our show, Main Stage Musical Full Monty, the nudity at the end, first of all, is kind of, it's supposed to be shows they're strong, shows they're powerful, shows they're, like, independent, and also is in silhouette. It's supposed to be in silhouette. But yeah, I think that there is a bit of a difference there, and I do think that nudity for the sake of nudity is a little bit problematic in my view, because I just feel like there's no purpose to it. Obviously, the nudity at the end of Full Monty was the point of the show, but then I just feel like, do you really need to have your actress take her shirt off right now? Are you sexualizing her?
Couldn't she go backstage?
Yeah, couldn't she go backstage?
Or can we choose shows that don't show women in always vulnerable positions?
Yeah, and I think because, like, theater, like there are, like, striptease shows and stuff, and, like, that is a version of theater. So I feel like when you're doing, like, a theatrical performance, like, you don't want to cross that line to be that, because, like, that's not what you're going for, but sometimes that can happen.
It's interesting to me how, like, here, like, the article talks about, like, overdoing nudity or doing nudity, like, for the sake of nudity, because, like, in China, like, there's no nudity at all. Like, in theater, it's just, like, nope. So, like, here it's, like, the exact opposite.
Really
it's, like, is it necessary, like, or is it just overdoing it? And so I think, that line is pretty interesting.
My friend was telling me she's at Vassar, and she was ASM for the Vibrator play, which had, like, she helped run auditions, and there was, like, this huge list of, like, are you comfortable with sex scenes, are you comfortable with partial nudity, are you comfortable with full nudity, and, like, a lot of people were like, no, and they had to, like, go and get other people, like, other actors outside of the program to, like, actually complete the show, because it was just, like, very difficult to get actors who were willing to do that, and, like, I'm sure it's harder if you're in an educational environment, like here, like a conservatory, where, like, you're casting a show and you need to do what the director asks you to do, and I'm sure that there are, like, things in place, like, if someone's not comfortable with something, but as an actor, I'm sure, like, if you say no to something, they, like, in the real world, they would just fire you. Like, they would just get someone else. So that can also be difficult, I think. And, like, you can't help if you're doing a show that maybe doesn't reflect women in a positive light, that, like, and maybe you do feel sexualized just for the sake of being sexualized, but you probably need to do it anyway.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to think about, like, age with this thing, because, like, the Full Monty is kind of a show for anyone. Like, it's a fun, pretty lighthearted thing, but, like, you don't really want, like, your little kids to see it. And I mean, like, we in movies and on television, like, everything is rated, like, PG-13. Like, you should be this old to see it, because nudity is, like, a big part of it. And it's like with theater, sometimes you're like, well, it's not nudity for nudity, but, like, you don't want kids to necessarily see that, and, like, parents will censor things, so it's kind of interesting to think where...
Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting that parents wouldn't want their kids to see that. Like, obviously, if it's really sexual, then maybe not. But, like, for example, when I was a freshman in high school, my stage tech class went to go see a production of, I think it was called Clementine the Lower Nine. And we almost didn't go because there's full frontal male nudity at one point in it. But it's literally just this guy taking a bath. So, like, he takes off his robe, and then he's naked because he's getting into a bath, and then he gets into the bath. And, like, it was such a big deal over something that really didn't need to be. But at the same time, it was. And, like, everyone in the audience at that moment was like, oh, whoa, he just took off his robe, and he's standing there naked now.
But then there's also a way
And
to
took it out of
suggest
the
taking
shower.
a bath without showing.
Exactly,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Right. I think we're gonna check on the computer. Oh, yeah, we're gonna do a computer check.
The light is green, so I think
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that it's...
Recording.
You got it, Sophie. Yay, okay.
Yeah.
our next article
So
is why fans of Hamilton should be delighted it's finally stirring criticism from Browbeat. I didn't finish it. By
This is where we get into the Hamilton
by
segment of
Isaac.
the podcast.
Oh yeah, welcome to the Hamilton segment by Isaac Butler. And so basically, this was talking about how fans of Hamilton, which is everyone, should finally be like excited that historians and like academics are criticizing Hamilton, and not necessarily in like it's not historically accurate, but just in like taking it more seriously, I guess, and kind of also talking about how Hamilton is basically unstoppable from this point and like cannot like criticism and like everyone knows it's the best thing ever, and like nothing can like take it down to this point. Obviously, it's sold out till forever, and like it's kind of like all this criticism is kind of irrelevant, but how it's like almost good that it's getting criticized because it's showing how people are taking it more seriously than it's just like a Broadway show. Like it's like it's become much more bigger than itself.
Yeah, I definitely think that it is a good thing that we have historians looking at this, because what other shows do like historians look at? Like
only ones from like 20, well, I would say like 40 years ago.
Or, like,
Right.
historians look at Shakespeare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
yeah, but
Coming
like
up later.
something brand new like this, like good. It should be getting attention for what it is.
Yeah.
But also, how often do you have something that's really big in sort of modern culture, the way Hamilton is, that is about history?
Yeah.
Like, history usually doesn't get this
Yeah.
much
Mhm.
publicity.
I do think it's it's kind of like an anomaly almost, because I remember I was reading a different article a couple weeks ago about how they're putting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill now and not the $10 bill. And literally in the article, the guy was like, "This might have had something to do with the popularity of Alexander Hamilton now." And I'm like, that is crazy.
Yeah.
And like, it's such, and like, obviously it's not entirely because of Hamilton, but that is a very
But, like,
significant thing to note. Like,
For sure.
it's like, it's taken over completely, and the fact that historians are now starting to criticize it means that people not only are taking Hamilton more seriously, but they might take theater more seriously. And I do think that's a big thing that we should be happy about, especially as theater makers, because we haven't been taken seriously for a long
Of
time.
course. And I liked how the author of the article called it kind of like fan nonfiction. Like we know like fan fiction is like teens on their computer writing about like Harry Potter if it was in the 1900s or something. But like it's like I like the idea of it being
That's,
like
like,
fan
cute,
nonfiction
yeah.
because it's like obviously someone who's very interested in history, this like history of America, taking it like and making it completely like race blind, like possibly gender blind, like you know, like completely turning over everything, and people still learning a lot from it, and people still being very interested in it, and making the story way more like captivating. And so I just thought that was kind of cute, like fan nonfiction. Like,
Yeah, I think
it's
that's
true, and like no other show that's like this popular, of course, kind of has that title in it.
All right, I think we can move on to our next article, which is another Hamilton article.
Yes.
Kind of.
So this one's Hamilton is getting screwed out of a Tony Award. It's by the Rolling Stones, written by Mickey Rapkin. And it's basically just, it is about Hamilton, but it's not really about Hamilton. It's more about how there's no more sound design Tony, and how that's kind of a big deal, because sound designers do a lot of really cool work that people don't know about that much, and now it's even less acknowledged. And they were interviewing the sound designer of Hamilton, who probably would have gotten that Tony, about his thoughts on it.
It's
And
just
that is, what's his name?
Nevin Steinberg. It's just the whole this whole thing when they took away the sound design award, like it's such bullcrap because like they're this thing that they release saying like for the reasoning behind it is that like our hundreds of judges like no one really understands how to critique sound design, and I was like then you hire sound people, then you get like really talented designers and technicians and like people who understand design, who auditory design, and it's like they're not sure what sound design is, but it's definitely not art, is basically how they sum it up.
I don't know, just because it's not visual doesn't mean it's not art.
Yeah, and the guy said, like, well, they still have a lighting design award, and that's also very technical, but also very beautiful, so people can see art, but they can't, like, listen to it. Because, like, I think some of the best sound design is sound design you don't really realize is happening.
Right, yeah, definitely.
And it, like, really goes in tandem with the visuals, but obviously they work just as hard, and obviously sound designers get, like, a lot of bad rep, and it's like...
Yeah. I mean, like, if someone was like, here, I'll give you these Hamilton tickets... You can't hear it, though. Yeah. But you can see it. Yeah. Like, no one's going to be down with that.
Yeah. I mean, I recently, over Christmas, saw Curious Incident of The Dog in the Night. And the biggest, show. Like, it was such a good show, but the biggest thing for me that I came away is I was saying that the sound was incredible. Yeah. And I had seen it with my sister and my mother. And, like, they were like, oh, yeah, it was pretty good. And I was like, but, like, you could feel it. And, like, because
it was all about, like, sensory overload.
Yeah, like, it was so good. And I'm like, there should be more talk about the sound in this, but it's because it goes so well with the visuals that you don't. It's like, you don't know. It's not like you don't know. You don't like really feel it. As, like just on its own.
I think that's common in tech in general. Is that a lot of stage tech? The whole point is that you don't notice it. Right. The whole point is that the sound just feels like a natural part of the world, and you don't go, "Oh, that was a sound cue." It just becomes part of the story. Yeah. So I think that makes it even more important to actually acknowledge the fact that there's this whole part of the art that is theater that is the sound aspect of it.
Also, what was it? So, I know, like, Carnegie Mellon is, like, one of those schools that, like, value both, like, the backstage stuff and the actors, but, like, I just want to know what you guys thought of the fact that Eurydice didn't have a sound designer.
Oh, yeah, that's...
The show that, like, really needed us.
Yeah, that was the show about the most, like, the man who's the best voice.
The demigod of music. Like, there just could have been so many opportunities for, like, a soundscape throughout the whole show. I was like, give it to a sophomore, give it to a freshman. Like, the fact that they didn't have anyone for it, like, obviously our sound program is small, but I'm sure someone could have taken on another show. Yeah. Like, I don't know who made that decision.
Yeah. And it's, like, interesting to think about that because if in the theater industry they're devaluing sound, like, through not having a Tony anymore and stuff, should we, as a school, be looking for more people that are interested in sound, or say, should we kind of let it die down, too?
I think that we have a lot of power, though. I mean, this is, like, the reality is, like, the people in the industry are the ones who have the power to do this. If, like, enough, I really do think, honestly, in a couple years, Sound Design Tony will be back because everyone is so mad about this. And also, Carnegie Mellon has a Tony Award. We literally have our own Tony Award that we give out to, like, high school teachers. Why has no one at Carnegie Mellon been like, hey, Tony people, we have sound designers?
But I feel like
Almeda, our third-year grad sound designer, her design for Lord of the Flies was amazing. It was my favorite part of the show. It, like, completely immersed you. And, like, it's really crappy to think that she would have no opportunity to ever win a Tony. Like, that...
Because she could win a Tony.
Yeah.
I feel like the fact that they didn't give a sound designer to Eurydice is just kind of, like, a subtle way of them being like, you don't really need a sound designer, which is ridiculous, because that's like, imagine they're like, we don't have a sound designer, we're just gonna, like, wing it.
Yeah, we're just gonna walk around in an empty stage.
Yeah. Kind of playing devil advocates here, but the other thing is, like, then you think of, like, media design, it's like, we don't assign media designers to every show, because it's not needed, because it's not done in traditional theater, but I think the opposite argument of that is that sound was done in the beginning of traditional theater, obviously not through speaker systems and whatnot, but, like, hand-done music things, and even just...
I feel like that is different, because every show you hear, but not every show, it has that aesthetic of, like, technology that would be helped with media design.
Right.
Maybe. But also, just, like, really quick, I think the fact that this is for the Tonys, like, when, I would watch the Tonys every year, and, like, I always know, I think we all notice how, like, they don't show the designers getting the awards even the big ones like Scenic and Lights and stuff, like, they show it after the commercial break, they show, like, a little clip of it, and, like, you know, it's like, this, like, wasn't surprising, really. Like, it sucked. Like, when it did happen, I was, like, really upset. But it's, like, I think that, and even when, I forget which one, like, one of the TV award shows that they showed the entire build-up to, like, the production design winners, and they showed their entire speech, and they're, like, everyone was clapping for them, and it was great. And I was like, wow, why doesn't this, like, feel familiar? Like, I've never seen designers be appreciated like this on television.
Oscars, I think.
Yeah. And I was like, this is really cool. And they even had like a background that had like a drafting table and like little clips from like their like design research. And I thought that was so cute. And I was like, why don't like theater is like so known for like these like beautiful designs. And it's like, why don't they even show the winners getting their awards? And we're all like, one day we'll get Tonys, and then no one will know our names because we'll be on TV for like 1 second.
Once again, this podcast was sponsored by Cheerios.
I think, why don't we just start a design only award show? Go all aspects: theater, production,
Let's do it.
theater, movies, TV.
But no one.
Let's start here.
I think the reason is that Tonys is like attracts a lot of like people who aren't necessarily like theater people, but they like the famous actresses, and I think we should force them to also see the designers.
I think part of it is that as a person who is not involved in the theater world at all, other than like you go see some plays sometimes or whatnot, it's easy to feel like you get what actors are doing. Like at the very least, you see them on stage doing the thing. Now, I'm not saying that they actually understand what actors do because they don't really understand, I think, like all of the time that goes into preparing for roles and like all the things they have to do to be able to dance like that and sing like that and all of that. Whereas, but they at least sort of feel like they kind of saw them do the thing.
I think it's more about like big names, honestly.
Whereas with tech, people often don't even think of a person having done that thing.
Yeah.
Like, they know the set was there and it's cool, but they don't think about the fact that someone designed that and someone built that, you know?
All right, I think we should move on to our next article, which is...
Orientalism, Whitewashing, and Erasure, Hollywood's Historic Problem with Asian People, by Jessica Lachinal on the Mary Sue website. So the article pretty much talks about how the Hollywood film industry doesn't know how to deal with Asian people, and like they don't really, not only do they like not cast Asian people, but when they tell Asian stories, they like whitewash it and cast white actors for it. Like the most recent,
the Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it's
she's supposed to be like Japanese.
Yeah, and they talk about how like in films, like even though there are so many countries in Asia, they're all like sort of clumped together and like represented in this like mystical, like mysterious world kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested to hear your opinion, like, even though, like, obviously you're not an actor, and also, like, your opinion as, like, a half Asian, if that's okay to say.
Well, like, it's because in China, like, because I went to school in China, like, we had, like, no issue with whitewashing at all, because, like, we had our own, like, entertainment industry and everything, so, like, we don't really see a problem with it, like, they're, like, obviously Hollywood films come here, but, like, we don't notice whitewashing at all, because we're like, oh, it's this film from America,
not whitewash,
so, like,
then.
Yeah, and so, like, even if there's, like, a Hollywood film, like, about, like, in Chinatown, one thing, like, it's interesting, it's funny or, like, kind of sad how, like, in Hollywood films, like, whenever they portray, like, something Asian, like, it's, like, always in, like, dirty, alleyways of Chinatown and stuff, but when, like, Asian films portray, like, America, it's always, like, New York City, you know? And I'm like, we have cities here, like, Shanghai is pretty much New York and China, but no, like, it's, like, so interesting how, like, we view them. It's
like the Eastern world.
It's, like, different how we view
when they, in, like, Chinese film industry, when they portray, like, America, do they use white actors, or do they use Asian actors?
Well, the story usually doesn't involve white actors. It's, like, the main protagonists of the story, like, travel to America or something, and they're always like in New York City, like all those big cities, and so it's really interesting.
That's interesting. I think usually in like our like American entertainment industry, there's like I think the problem is like there's such a specificity put on like what Asian people look like and what Asian people are, and like there's
what
always like
do.
The Asian nerd geek, and like or like the
or,
sexy Asian girl who's like really submissive and like gets saved by like you know like the white guy, and it's like there's so many like specific tropes that are like only Asian people can only play this and only play this, and it's like white people can do anything, and it's because like we're in America and that's like just the way it is, and it's like it's the same with like a lot of races too, but just like obviously in different ways. But it's like there are such specific stories that Asian people are like allowed to be in.
And also one thing is like I don't know, something I noticed here is like obviously this happens with a lot of different races too, but like for example black people, they have like Beyonce and all these like I don't know, not pop stars, but like icons to like have the power to like stand up to these things, but like there's no Asian people at all, like because I saw a video interview about like whitewashing, like people interviewing people like Asian people in New York about whitewashing, and they're like they care, but like they like a lot of Asian immigrants, like they don't have the time or energy to stand up for themselves. They're like too busy making a living, but like. And that's just, like, kind of sad.
And, like, you mentioned, like, because I'm half Asian, and it's, like, people are always like, oh, my God, you're Asian? And it's, like, Asian people all look different. Like, there's a wide range of how Asian people look. Like, I'm always, like, people are like, oh, my God, I had no idea. And it's, like, I'm sorry. Like, they're, like, like, people think that white people can look like anything. Scarlett Johansson can look Japanese, but all Asian people look the same. And it's, like, that's why there's no distinction. It's because people, like, Asian people can fit into this small box.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people just don't realize how big
Asia.
Even the term Asian, it's like
that's actually Japan, that's China, and like
that's
so many.
It's an entire continent.
It's a continent.
Yeah. It's
insane.
We're not North American.
It's like saying like,
but we do the same. Like as the United States, we do the exact same thing to Africa. We do the exact same thing to the entirety of South Central America. Like as the United States. We're really good at just making everyone else into a monolith. The Middle East is a monolith.
It's the idea of a single story that like prevents Asian actors and like and Asian people at all, and like from being able to be successful in entertainment.
So, kind of going off the social justice vein of things, our next article is called "Breaking Records at Art and Feminism's Wikipedia Edit-A-Thon." By Sammy Emery, and it was published by the Creators Project. So this was about an event that happened where a bunch of women and feminists got together to add, I think it was 2,000 new Wikipedia pages about women in art to the Wikipedia website, and they updated about 1,500 of them. And I think that is so cool. That is super cool. And basically the article just kind of detailed about the process of that and how it was just such a huge amount of people. And I do think that, I remember in high school we did the Heidi Chronicles, and it just really resonated with me with that moment.
Well, I'm not familiar with
so it's a play about a woman who goes from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and like her life through there, and she goes, she dabbles in like the feminism movement and like a hippie movement. There's one specific scene where they like march in a museum and they're chanting for women in art, and it's just fun. It's just kind of like, it's cool to see that like, I don't know, but that was a movement from years ago, and it's still a movement, but I think that's both a happy and a sad thing. It's good that we're still fighting for it, but it's also sad that we still have to fight for it. But I do think that there is not enough emphasis on women in art, especially, I think, in a historic sense, because I feel like most people, if you ask them to name a famous artist, like Van Gogh or Monet, but there's no, even for me, I couldn't think of a woman to just list in that order. Like, I think we need to think back and kind of look back on more
even like I guess who artists were like 90% men, and like even like
Susan tries
an amazing like artist. Obviously, she was like, I'm just not familiar with a lot of female artists who did like 3-dimensional artwork, and we were like, wow.
I think something that's kind of interesting to bring up with this is that like in elementary school, like all the girls loved music class and art class, and like typically the boys did it, and it's like so interesting to think about that, because like when you're young you don't think about like sexism and that stuff, so you're like inherently girls are more drawn towards that like mind and doing that kind of stuff, but then for careers it's the exact opposite.
It's
like,
all lies, because they're like, oh, you're a girl, it'll be so easy for you to go into art, and then we're here, and then they're like, actually no. It's still dominated by men. But I thought this article was cool because, like, I never thought about, like, Wikipedia's gender disparity. Because I was like, it's Wikipedia. Like, I use it for history essays. Like, but people lie on it and stuff. But, like, how it talked about how the large majority of Wikipedia writers are men. And I was like, that's really strange because Wikipedia is such a part of our, like information culture now. And, like
a Google saying it's the first.
Exactly. And, like, that's a big part of, like, why I think they got a bunch of women to edit things, because I'm sure, like, there were a lot of blank areas of like women's history and important female figures in history.
I think it's also cool and stuff. Like people always talk about how anyone can edit Wikipedia, sort of more as that being a problem. But this kind of shows how, anyone can edit Wikipedia. So people who, like in the past, would have had to like do some big protest to try to get someone else to increase representation of women, can now just be like, well, I can go do it myself because I can edit the sort of one of the biggest platforms that people use to just sort of get general information about things.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to the next article.
Oh, the next article is called Yes, Calling Someone a Techie Can Be Offensive. It's from On Stage by Chris Peterson. And this article, I think, kind of resonates with all of us as people who I've called myself a techie. I know people who call me a techie. Someone told me I was majoring in techie college.
Oh my gosh.
This kind of shows that it's not the best word to use. And I think my favorite quote that this article has is said, how would you like it if we called you an actie? And, like, I guess there's, like, technician is kind of a long word to say, so it might just gotten shortened down to, like, techie because it's a shorter word to say, but it's, like, when you think about it, it's not the nicest word.
But I also don't like being called technician.
Yeah, what that most is that, like, that being, like, calling you a technician implies that, like, there's no art in the work you do, like, it's all just technical, like, you just build stuff, like, what was it I overheard, like, a few days ago, one of the actors.
So an actor that I won't name, obviously, was in their foundations drama class, and the professor said, what's the difference between designers and actors, which is also not a good question to ask because we all work together to accomplish the same goal. And even for managers, like, I can consider myself an artist, but I consider myself a facilitator of the arts, so we're all supposed to work together.
And not a technician by any means.
But, so one of the acting students said, well, the actors think about a show in a more metaphorical and, like, creative way, and then the designers, like, build it. And I'm like, that is so wrong. First of all, it's not the designers, people with the label of design that are building it, mostly. And it's just, like, there's so much thought and creativity.
As if designers never think about metaphors.
Yeah, and it's just, like, it dumps everything down so much to be like, oh, there's the techies, look at them go. And it also really helps to, like, I don't know, like, especially, I'm not sure how it was in your guys' school, but, like, for us, it was always, like, if you didn't make it into a musical, you were a techie. And it's, like, it really
that
is.
happened a lot at my high school.
Yeah, it's just, like, so condescending, it makes it cutesy, and it makes it seem like we don't put in hours of work, because the stuff we do isn't cutesy. Staying up till 4 a.m. to make a catalog is not cutesy.
And I think some of it, honestly, might come from that high school mindset, because the amount, and you can totally contradict this because my high school experience might have been different, but, like, the amount of work that you do as, like, a scenic designer in high school is very different than the amount of work you do as, like, a professional scenic designer, and I think sometimes everyone always keeps that mindset of what they did in high school, like, where it was, like, a couple of weeks you kind of went and hammered some nails together and, like, put some paint on things, and I don't think people realize that it turns into a huge career, like, because of the talent that you have for it, and it's not something that people realize is a big process.
Yeah, like in my high school tech, we all worked very hard and we, like, stayed late every night, but we all had sweatshirts that said techies on them with, like, Andover Drama Guild, and, like, that was fine in high school because, like, none of us, like, we all took it seriously, like, but then, like, coming here, I think that's when it becomes problematic because it's, like, we're actually, like, literally being trained, like, it's a conservatory thing to like, do it for the rest of our lives. Then I also think that, like, also in Foundations of Drama, that our professor the first day, me and a few other people in our class were, like, there were, like, 4 of us or 3 of us in that class. It was majority actors and dramaturgs and directors. And the first day, our professor said, "Are there any technicians in here?"
Oh my God.
And we all wanted to be designers, and we were kind of looked at each other and we were like, "Does she mean us?" Like, not that. Like, I'm sure a lot of us will be technicians at some point in our lives, but I'm like, I don't know. I think I feel like that refers more to, like, sound engineers and lighting engineers, or, like, master, like, electricians, and, like, that kind of thing, which is also obviously very viable. But to call designers technicians is, I think, kind of weird because it, like, it does, like, reduce the art.
And then from a manager perspective, you kind of are like, well, I'm not really a designer.
Yeah.
So it's, like, also, like...
Yeah. And also you're backstage.
Right, so it's, like,
techie
techie's even farther away from that. And it...
Yeah, I think one reason why... Because I do feel like techie works for high school. I called myself a techie in high school. I don't really think it's offensive, but I think the reason why techie kind of stops just working as a term in industry is because there's no one in industry who is a techie.
Yeah.
Because when you're in high school, maybe there's sort of the thing you tend to do, but there isn't really this differentiation between career paths. Mm-hmm. Like in high school, you can do sound for one show, and then do scenic for the next show, and then stage manage the next show. And people kind of just jump around through the backstage world, which is great. But then once you go into industry, typically you're not going to have someone that's run crew on one show and a set designer on another show and a sound designer on another show. Yeah. And so the whole idea of someone just being a techie, the entire backstage
Yeah.
world
Yeah.
doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and one thing I don't know, really problematic. I don't know if it happened to your high schools. Is that like in our high school, like the faculty valued actors so much that like
Yeah.
if they want to do backstage stuff, they get to do it. So like one show, like they just told our theater tech club like we don't need any like lighting board op or designers or anything because our actors want to do it. So it's just kind of like they think that actors are like only talented people can be actors, but anyone can be
The
techies.
rejects.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Because, like, in high school, a lot of the thing, like, you don't have the, like, really, like, good equipment, so, like, anyone in theory can, like, flip that switch,
Yeah.
do that kind of stuff. But then, like, when you move into a conservatory program like this or into the real world, it's so much more than that, and I don't think people realize it.
Why don't we move on to our next article?
So our next article is called William Shakespeare, Enough Already. It's been 4 centuries, for crying out loud.
Cheerios for this month.
It's from the DC theater scene, and it was by a guest writer named, where
It just says guest writer. They don't publish them.
no,
His name was
it's-
R.W.
yeah,
Schneider.
R.W.
There you go.
Schneider.
Oh, sorry, I didn't read the
So basically he's talking about how Shakespeare is very frequently produced, and what he's arguing is that it's overproduced, that, like, he doesn't even think we should do it less. He was saying that we should just stop producing Shakespeare, that there's a lot of other writers, and that there's no point, and not even, because we don't even produce Shakespeare's full work. There's sort of a subset of Shakespeare plays that tend to be produced, and he just feels like they have been produced enough times.
Yeah, I completely agree with this article. I've not always been a big fan of Shakespeare. I think it's way overdone. It's, like, typical, and it's, like, kind of exhausting at this point. I mean, like, there was a class in my high school, like, where they only did Shakespeare, and I'm like, there's so many other good writers from that time. Like, you only get one point of view. Like, there's so many, like, logical, like, this is so stupid. Like, would you ever, like, just sing Beyonce? Like, yes, she's good, but, like, I mean, like, it's so,
My main
know
thing with
with
this is, like, from a, like, I want to be a designer, so, like, from a design standpoint, like, I don't mind, like, I wouldn't mind just, like, doing a lot of Shakespeare in my life, because, like, I think there are unique design opportunities for any kind of show, and it's not, like, designing another Shakespeare show, like, they're all different, but, like, my main thing with this is the more, like, the sexism in Shakespeare's work, and, like, the antiquity of it, like, we've moved past it, like, and there are a lot of ways that people are trying to, like, update it, like, I thought Antony and Cleopatra was, like, amazing, and, like, what a good example of, like, Shakespeare that's not Shakespeare.
yeah.
But, like, my main problem, like, the first show we did and we were in crew for was Much Ado, and while I liked the idea that they were trying to, like, show this woman who was kind of, like, out of the bounds of, like, what was expected of her as a woman, and they were trying to kind of show her, like, dominance in this world, this, like, man-dominated world, and we kind of updated it in time, and, like, costumes and set also, but, like, when you get to the script, like, you can't edit the script that much, and at the end of the day, like, she marries the man and she's happy, and the man can, like, switch to the woman he's going to marry because they look the same, and it's, like, that's still the story of it, and it's, like,
It's
as much
so
as we
unfair.
try to update it, we can't avoid that, and it's still, like, really disheartening as a woman to see that stuff being celebrated over and over again. It was still a beautiful production, but at the end I was like, ugh, like, that's still the message of the story, and, like, there are so many great female players who I'm sure could write a much better story that's, like, still has that plotline of it.
Like, I just think that it's, like, even just, like, talking about the scripts, the language is archaic.
Yeah.
And, like, and there was one thing in there, it's like most kids, like, their first time they read Shakespeare in their English class will never understand it. And I think that that's a problem. I don't think it's something we should be like, well, you just gotta get used to the Shakespearean language. Like, I remember there was an article way back in the day on the blog.
Way back in the
I'm
day.
like an old person. Back when I was, no. So it was, like, talking about how they wanted to have, I think it was Oregon Shakespeare Festival.
He actually talks about that in this article, yeah.
I guess he does. Talking about, like, how they wanted to update all the text, and it's just, like, the reality is, like, updating the text is such a good idea, because why do you want to have something in English if literally native English speakers can't even understand it?
Yeah.
And I understand it's, like, a style, but it's also just sort of, at this point, I feel like a bit redundant.
My AP English teacher spent 3 months of our whole year on Hamlet, and I was like, I only can do so much other stuff.
Yeah, I think it's so... I mean, when, like, you look at it from this point of view, it's so stupid. Like, what the hell are we doing? This one person?
Yeah.
Like,
and it's like,
why do you... What?
Yeah, and like it's sort of when I had to read Romeo and Juliet my freshman year of high school, oh my god,
it's like, I think it's fine. We should, like, Shakespeare is obviously beautiful and he's very iconic, and it's like, he's obviously very, like, so important to the theater industry. I'm not denying that, but it's like, there are so many more opportunities that we could be taking. I think there, like, people use a lot of excuses for not, like, producing new work, and I feel like it's just one of them, like.
Yeah, I think we need to move forward, and I think saying no more Shakespeare is a lot. I would love, though, to, like, challenge the world to go, like, 1 year without Shakespeare. Like,
even a month.
Like, because then, I don't know, I think it would challenge so many people to try new things and, like, really do something different.
I mean, there are entire companies that are just...
Yeah, there's one down the street from Shakespeare in
Colorado.
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
See this article, this like whole conversation, because I'm working at Colorado Shakespeare Festival this summer, and I am completely in love with Oregon Shakespeare Festival. But interestingly enough, one of the things I love about Oregon Shakespeare Festival is that they don't just do Shakespeare. Like, you can still be a Shakespeare festival and do other works too. Like, they did Water by the Spoonful a couple years back, and it was amazing. And, like, I think what's great about a lot of Shakespeare festivals isn't the Shakespeare, it's that you have a bunch of people who are really good working on shows and doing them really well. And so you can do Shakespeare really well, but you can also do other plays really well. And I think Shakespeare can be really great. Like, I love a lot of Shakespeare plays, but at the same time, like, especially when it comes to, like, at my high school, every single English class read at least one Shakespeare play for the entire 4 years. Yeah. That's like, dude, we don't read more than maybe 2 plays at most by any other author. Yet they have us read a Shakespeare every year.
It's like, you're like, I'm just like so astounded. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Like, there's no one else that, as like writers, that we do this with. And it's so weird, like, because you think of this one person, the crazy impact that they've had, and not to, like, not celebrate that, but, like, has there only been one person in history to do that? Like, there's other great writers, too, that should get attention, but they're drowned out by Shakespeare.
I think another reason is that Shakespeare is used a lot in, like, education, not just, like, in English classes, although, like, we can obviously all attest to that, but in, like educational theater, like, I live close to, like, Shakespeare & Co., which does... Like, they did, like, a residency at our school, and we did Midsummer, and it was cute, and it was fun, and it was, like, a different kind of experience, so, and I think that they see Shakespeare as kind of, like, by the book, like, this is a play, and, like, for all these students who have not done plays before, this is what we're gonna do, which is, like, obviously it was a good experience, but there are other plays we could have done that with.
Yeah. Move on from Shakespeare.
Sorry. So this next one is called Exploring the Myth of the Scientific... Exploding. Got it. Okay, I'm a problem. Exploding the Myth of the Scientific and Stop it! Versus the Artistic Mind. From The Conversation by The Conversation by David Pearson.
Oh my god.
Wow, okay. So I really like this article. It basically talks about how people kind of categorize artistic people versus scientific people, and they use different parts of their brain, and this article kind of shows that that's not actually what happens. I think others can speak to this too, that I personally feel science and the arts are very much on the same level, and there's so much overlap and parallels to it, and science has always been my other, like, favorite subjects. Like, when I was applying to colleges, I applied to colleges for theater, and then I applied to colleges for neuroscience. So it was like, I have these two things, and, I mean, obviously I'm fortunate here because science is a big thing at this school, and it's so together.
Yeah, for sure.
I just don't think that there is any purpose in differentiating between the two. Because I feel like all it does is really divide people more, I guess. Because, I mean, actually I think Carnegie Mellon is a really good case study in that. Because we really do have the arts and the sciences, which are two big things that we're really good at.
And we're this size, and they're this size.
But also, I feel like when they do interact is the coolest thing. So, like, I remember... like people posting on Facebook being like, hey, can we have actors for this motion capture thing? So they need the skills of the actors to make them able to do the science part, which is to, like, capture their emotion and, like, convert it to other stuff. And, like, that is such a cool collaboration. And, like, even media design as a thing is very much
so much design now is
science.
influenced by technology, even, like, laser cutters and CAD and stuff.
And then on the other...
Paint. Paint is about the chemistry of it. Like, after I took AP Chem, I then, the next year, did a bunch of stuff in my sculpture class where I, like, design glazes from scratch, like, from the constituent parts. And a lot of that is about how those chemicals interact and, like, what happens with various chemicals when they're exposed to heat and then fired and turn into a glaze. Like, that's science.
Yeah.
You're using it for art, but it's science.
Mm-hmm.
And also science needs, like, art,
That's
like,
what I
and
was just
creative
gonna
stuff,
say.
too. Like, so many apps and, like, programs that we use
Yeah.
today, like, if you're not creative, you can't think of these kind of stuff, you
Yeah.
know?
A thing that this is a little story. A thing that happened this year with me is my roommate is a robotics major, and she was doing this project where they want to talk to someone in drama, so she brought me in, and I guess their project was, like, they had all these, like, little, they called them finches, they were these little robots, and they were taking them to a middle school, and they wanted them to put on, like, this video storytelling piece with these robots, and they were like, we have no idea what to do, we just program stuff. So they had asked me to come in and, like, help them kind of, like, design this thing, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, to feel needed, like, in that way was, like, really cool.
Oh yeah, and I don't know if other people can speak to this, but, like, I was always, like, the art kid in high school, but, like, I really hated when people just assumed I, like, couldn't do math or, like, couldn't be organized. Like, I'm not that, like, those are my favorite things, but it's, like, definitely things I'm still capable of, and it's, like, as silly as it, like, every other article in the blog is, like, really, these two sides of the brain are very much connected. Art needs science, and science needs art, and it's, like, oh, no shit, like, we all know that, but it's, like, we still, for sure, divide people like this.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, like,
I think
when,
our
if
school
we,
is such a big
yeah,
example
like, when
of
we
it.
walk by, like a comp sci building, or, like, if we walk by someone studying computer science, we're like, wow, you're actually smart. Like, we say that, too, like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's kind of...
And, like, people's reactions when you say you're in drama, they're, like, either like, oh, or they're like, oh.
Yeah.
Last one.
Last article, which is The Art of Failure. And it's Samra Kawaha. And it is on National Endowments for the Arts.
It's
So-
like art.gov.
And
Yeah.
pretty much it's like a compilation of, like, different quotes from different artists and how they view failure. And one thing that stood out to me the most, like, obviously they all talk about how, like, failure is important and stuff, but one of the artists talk about how, like, she doesn't she says, I don't think I've had any failures as an artist. I've had things didn't turn out the way I expected them to, but I really can't recall failure, which is interesting because I don't know how you can grow without, like, recognizing failure. So, like, I think it's very important to, like, recognize you failed, and then you can grow from it. So, I don't know. It's just interesting that some artists think that they can't fail.
I think the best way to take this conversation is I'm going to ask you a college essay question. What was one thing that you failed at, and how did you learn from it? Everyone has to go.
I mean, I can go. I just even talking about the freshman arcade projects, which was our final design project, just finished up. I think I learned a lot. I think that I learned a lot, especially in the early stages. I feel like there was a bit of a communication breakdown within my group, and I think through that failure, it really helped me to make sure to reinforce later in the project. Hey, make sure you send me these daily updates. Let me know what you're doing at this time, and, like, it really helps to strengthen, like, knowing what you're bad at helps you to strengthen that thing. And even, or, like, first semester, like, I didn't do as well in drafting because I made a lot of careless mistakes. Now I have a checklist I keep on my desk, but I check off when I'm done with stuff because I know what my weaknesses are, and, like, failing helps you find the weaknesses, and it also helps you to address them. And I think that without failure, you can't really do that.
So, how did you fail?
Well, I failed in arcade by, I don't know, I just feel like I wasn't, like, assertive enough when it comes to, like, telling other people, like, my, like, what I want them to do when they're doing something, like, that I, like, for, like, yeah. I should be more assertive, and, like, I feel like, yeah, our performance day would have turned out a lot better if I was.
But I think that's hard if, like, you don't have because, like, I don't, like, your lighting design was beautiful and, like, definitely not a failure, and, like, your arcade project as a whole was definitely not a failure, but, like, you're saying, like, you can...
In that sense.
Yeah, but then, like, failure is such a big word that, like, I think we tend to be like, well, that wasn't really a failure, that was just, like, I didn't really like this project, but that wasn't really a failure of me, because, like, failure is, like, a scary, scary thing.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and I did use this in a college essay. My biggest failure was when I was 10 or something, and my mother put me in theater, because that's what my older sister did, and I auditioned for shows, and this one audition, my sister went before me, and then I was going in afterwards just at the community theater, and I refused to go in the room. I started crying because I couldn't do it, and I thought it was the biggest failure in the world, but then that was when I got brought into doing the production side of theater, and it, like, completely changed my life, and brought me to this other world of theater that I absolutely love.
cute. I don't know. I feel like those examples from like freshman year are more applicable. Like I really hated my metal box, but like I did it and it like met the criteria. So I don't know if that's like a failure. Like failure is so scary. I definitely failed a lot of assignments in my junior year math class.
Oh, me too. And how'd you learn from it? Why was it valuable?
Because my teacher was so mean. I learned to go for extra help.
Yeah, there you go.
Accepting help.
This is a very different example of failure, but since I'm thinking about sculpture right now, it popped in my head. The last sculpture I made in like my third year sculpture class was this 3 foot by 3 foot by 1.5 foot giant human eye. And keep in mind, this is the biggest thing anyone in our class had made, and so we were using the outdoor gas kiln to fire it, and going into it, I knew that we weren't sure about how the outdoor gas kiln was going to handle it, and I didn't quite wait long enough. The firing wasn't as slow as I thought it was going to be because there's like a little bit of a communication breakdown somewhere. Anyway, it just blew up. This giant eye, it just blew up. And so, I mean, sort of the learn from the failure, like, right, I could have fired it longer, or I could have, like, looked into an alternate kiln that would be, like, more able to fire it. But in terms of, like, well, okay, I now have these shards of eye. So I went through and, like, because I had done all this intricate carving on the iris and whatnot, and so, like, I kind of picked together the biggest pieces that, like, okay, when I lay all of these out, it looks like an eye. So then I went through, colored it the way I had been planning on underglazing it before, and then what I'm working on now is, like, it's going to be a wall hanging piece where, like, it looks like the eye is exploding and, like, each shard is on something. Because
that's not failure.
But it was. Like, it was distinctly failure. Like, it blew up. My project literally exploded.
But then you make the best of it.
But then you are like, well, you can either throw it out or you can keep going. And you have to learn from what went wrong in the first place. Mm-hmm. But also that just because it, like, undeniably failed doesn't mean that it's undeniably over.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of important.
What a beautiful note to end on.
Yay! All right. This has been the News from the Real World podcast. I'm Megan.
I'm Sophie.
Annie. Sasha.
Julian.
Thank you.
Good joining us. Yay.
Okay.
There you go. Stop the video, Sophie.
Just because it undeniably failed doesn't mean it's undeniably over. But this podcast is undeniably over.
All the Cheerios that are on the floor.